now, no problem. They will cut.
Okay, sister.
Good morning, ma'am.
Yes, hello students, good morning.
Good morning,
Good
ma'am.
morning, ma'am. Good morning.
Yesterday we ended up discussing the devices, the literary devices, which were they? Do you remember some of the literary devices that we discussed yesterday? Devices like rhythm, rhyme, and then alliteration, assonance. These were the devices that we discussed yesterday. And now today we are into the second block. The second block we have the other literary devices such as the, just a second. We have devices like metaphor, simile, symbol, images, imagery, all those things we have to discuss now. We are into, we also discuss what is known as the onomatopoeic words, words which are similar to the sounds that we hear in nature. Words which have been created, which have been formed, imitating sounds from nature. They are called onomatopoeic words like buzzing, hiss, all those words, cuckoo. All those words come under the title onomatopoeic words. See, yesterday we also discussed how English is a language which is known as a language governed by stress. So it is something which is governed by stress. It has a stress timed rhythm. And what does it mean? It has a stress timed rhythm means the rhythm of the language is governed by what is called stress. Stress governs the rhythm of the language. So, and how do we find out which word or which unit of a word is stressed? The unit which is stressed is said to be the stressed syllable. Words can be divided into units, smaller units, based on the vowel sounds present in them. So if we have a word with 3 vowel sounds present in them, we can divide that word into 3 syllables. And not all the syllables are pronounced alike. Not all syllables are given prominence during pronunciation. When we pronounce it, we do not give equal prominence to all the units or syllables in the word. So the unit or the syllable which gets the prominence during utterance, that syllable or that unit is said to be the stressed syllable. And based on that, see, when we have a sentence, an English sentence with us, we find out that, see, at regular intervals, these stressed syllables keep on repeating. And this, see, repeated occurrence or the regular occurrence of stressed syllables in English sentences is what gives the language its rhythm. That was what we spoke about when we talked of rhythm. We also spoke about rhyme, we discussed alliteration, we discussed assonance, we discussed onomatopoeic words. Now into the next unit, which is unit 6. Yes, somebody is asking, will mu be onomatopoeic? Yes, it is an onomatopoeic word. So now into unit 6 in block 2 with other figures of speech. See, we have what is called the simile, we have metaphor, we have synecdoche, and we have merime, and personification, of course. These are the 5 figures of speech discussed in unit 6. If you are online, the page number is unit 6, page number 18. If you have your textbook with you, please follow. It is unit 6. Unit 6, page number 18. So now, let us discuss what simile and metaphor are. He has given the title, they are figures of speech present in literary texts, and how do they occur, or how are they formed? Actually, these two are used to make it different, make the literary language different from the ordinary one. And what happens is, most of the time we make comparisons between two people or two objects. And while comparing, we use words like as and like. See, while comparing two objects or two people or one object and a human being, anything of that sort, two ideas, we use the words like and as. See the example given in your textbook. First, let me read out the definition of simile. Simile is an expression in which we make a comparison between two things to present an effective word picture, and use words such as like and as. See, in the example given, you have the little white feet nod like white flowers in a wind. So, there is a comparison between the baby's feet. Page number is 18, 6.2 we are discussing. Unit 6, 6.2. So, when we compare the white feet of a baby, what we are doing is we are comparing it with white flowers which nod during wind. So little white feet nod like white flowers in a wind. So the white feet of a baby is compared to white flowers which nod during the wind. So this is how we make comparison using simile. So simile is a way of comparing things, an expression in which we compare things, compare objects in order to create effective word picture. So when we listen to such a comparison, see, we start imagining in our minds a baby, a small baby, its white feet, and then the white flowers which are nodding in the wind. So that kind of a mental picture, word
വോയിസ്
picture can be
കുറവാണല്ലോ
formed.
മാം.
Is it? Let me check.
വോയിസ് കുറവാണ്, കേൾക്കാൻ ചെറിയൊരു പ്രയാസമുണ്ട്.
Okay, let me check.
Voice is low. Sound not clear.
It is clear for me. I think there is no problem. We can continue, miss. അവർക്ക് ചിലപ്പോൾ റേഞ്ച് ഇല്ലാത്തതുകൊണ്ടായിരിക്കും.
Okay, now how is it?
It's better, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Now moving on. we were talking about the word picture formed when we read such a comparison between a baby's feet and the white flowers which nod during the wind. So metaphors and similes are figures of speech used to compare two things and in order to create an effect and appeal upon the reader. And through this, we are able to create a mental picture, a word picture in our minds. So that is about simile. Moving on to metaphor. See, in a metaphor, we are doing the same thing. We are comparing two objects, two things, but just that we do not make use of the words as and like. See, metaphor. During the usage of metaphor is a figure of speech again, which is done using when we compare two objects. But here we do not use the words as and like. See, in a simile, there is a direct comparison. In a metaphor, we just suggest a comparison between two things. Maybe one aspect of these two things will be similar, and we start comparing it without using the words like and as. See, examples are given in your textbook in the section 6.3. Section 6.3, the river snakes its way through the mountains. The river snakes its ways through the mountain. The river is compared to a snake because the movement of the river and the snake seems to be similar. That is why an expression is used. See, think of somebody saying that the river flows through the mountain. Simply saying that the river flows through the mountain. What happens to the same sentence? The idea remains the same, but the beauty of it is lost. See, when we make a sentence like the river snakes its way through the mountains, we are actually bringing in a comparison between the river and the snake. At the same time, we are making the sentence different from a day-to-day usage. See, the river flows through the mountains. Such sentences we use daily in our day-to-day conversation. But when somebody says the snake its way through the mountains, see, it looks beautiful, it looks appealing. At the same time, we are making use of what is known as the metaphor. There is a comparison made between two things, and one quality is same between the two objects or the two things in discussion. See, similarly, the ripe pumpkins were golden idols among the corn stalks. See, the ripe pumpkins are compared to golden idols. On their shining tracks, the waiting diesel engines purred softly. The diesel engines purred as if they were kittens. So there is a comparison between the kittens and the engine. So this is how we make use of figures of speech, simile and metaphor. So there is something called extended metaphor. See, when in a sentence we make such comparison without the use of words like and as, we simply call it a metaphor. But when the whole comparison, it is dragged or it is taken on throughout the whole paragraph or throughout the whole piece of writing, we call it an extended metaphor. See, the whole paragraph or the article actually makes use of this comparison. Somebody who has switched on the camera, please switch it off. Harsha, your camera is on. Okay. Extended metaphor is nothing but see, the metaphor is extended throughout the piece of writing. It is extended over an entire poem or any other piece of writing. If it's an article, if it's a paragraph, anything, it is the metaphor, the whole comparison moves on throughout the poem or the piece of writing. So such a comparison or such a metaphor is known as the extended metaphor. See, sometimes a writer continues a metaphor over an entire poem or any other piece of writing. This is called an extended metaphor. See, we will not have any problem identifying the metaphors, extended metaphors, because see, they run throughout the whole long stretch of writing. Whole long stretch of writing. See, page number is 22. Extended metaphors are often easier to recognize because they continue over a long stretch of writing. See, here is an example given. I remember once a kid lying on my back watching clouds. Row upon row of factory perfect models drifted along the assembly line. There went a schooner, flag flying, and look, the snapping toy poodle with the most absurd cut. Next came chilly Greenland with Labrador, much too close for comfort, but the banana split was the best one of all. See, there is a comparison. The metaphor runs throughout the whole piece of writing. And what is this metaphor? The metaphor is that of, see, the shapes formed by the clouds which are floating overhead, the various shapes that it acquires. The various shapes that the clouds acquire while floating overhead. So, this is about extended metaphor. Moving on to the next one, mixed metaphor. See, mixed metaphor is nothing but, see, 2 or 3 metaphors or comparisons are made at the same time in a given piece of writing. See, occasionally writers combine 2 metaphors which do not normally go together. This is called a mixed metaphor. So, metaphors, more than one metaphor is made use of in the same piece of writing. See, it is there in page number 23.
No?
Page
Hello?
number 23. Hello, sister. Please mute your phones.
Hello?
Please, hello, sister.
Students, please listen. നിങ്ങൾ അനാവശ്യമായിട്ടുള്ള മെസ്സേജസ് ചാറ്റ് ബോക്സിൽ ഈ സമയത്ത് കൗൺസിലിങ്ങിന്റെ ടൈമിൽ ചെയ്യരുത്.
You Malayalam, why do you don't speak?
അപ്പോൾ ജസ്റ്റ് നിങ്ങൾ അനാവശ്യമായിട്ട് മെസ്സേജ് ഇങ്ങനെ അയച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരുന്നാൽ നമുക്ക് ക്ലാസ്സിൽ ഡിസ്റ്റർബൻസ് ഉണ്ടാവും. പേജ് നമ്പർ ചോദിക്കാൻ കുഴപ്പമില്ല, അത് ആരെങ്കിലും അറിയാവുന്ന പെട്ടെന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു കൊടുക്കുക. അതുകൊണ്ട് ജസ്റ്റ് പരസ്പരം ഈ ക്ലാസ് ഡിസ്റ്റർബ് ചെയ്യാതിരിക്കാൻ ശ്രദ്ധിക്കുക. ഓക്കെ.
Hello, sister.
Thank you, sir, for the reminder. So please stop.
This class is hacked.
Ma'am, your class has been hacked. We all are hackers.
What's happening here?
Yes, hello, sister.
Continue.
Asra, share the link.
Hello.
Please stop unnecessary chats.
Ma'am,
It's a
you continue.
disturbance to
Continue.
all.
Continue.
I have a question. What's your name? Kidik Kidik Bum. चलने
Shut
दे
your
क्षमा
mouth
क्षमा.
and watch what he's doing here. What you're saying, bro?
Please stop unnecessary conversations.
Ah,
We are into the class.
ah.
So now let's continue. We are in page number 23. Page number 23, we are discussing mixed metaphor. See, I told you what is a metaphor. I told it is meant by extended metaphor. Now into 6.3.2, which is mixed metaphor. See, writers, authors make use of metaphors, two metaphors together. But these metaphors may not go together. So writers make use of such mixed metaphors.
Ma'am,
Yes.
ma'am, Athulus George sent me messages, ma'am. Abusing me in the chat.
Ma'am, can we restart this meeting again? I think there is so much disturbance.
Stop, you
Yeah.
motherfucker.
Next
So
time.
Yeah,
much
yeah,
disturbance.
Yeah.
Stop,
yes,
you
yes, yes.
motherfuckers.
Can we go Allah Akbar?
Please stop unnecessary conversations.
मुझसे
Get back to the
शादी
class.
करोगी,
I'm sorry, my bad.
मेरी भाभी बनोगी.
Ma'am, some Bengali guy has entered our meeting.
We all are hackers, hackers, hackers.
How can we
Hello,
not study,
sister.
man?
Hey, ma'am.
What
Hey,
people
ma'am.
have been?
Hello, sister.
Hi, ma'am.
Hello.
Sister, what should I do? So much of disturbance.
Teacher continue.
Jack off.
No need to restart. Non-Malayalis are disturbing.
Myra.
Now restart is the only one the opportunity now to do.
No
Because
problem. We
now
can
What the
continue.
fuck you
No
mean
problem.
now?
Disturbance ഉണ്ടാക്കുന്നവരെ ഞാൻ remove ചെയ്തോളാം. Teacher continue ചെയ്തു.
Okay, sister.
Sister,
Thank you.
Fuck you all
sister,
Indians.
you don't know anything. We should restart this meeting.
Fuck you.
Restart the meeting.
जो भी है ना केवल केवल नाम का लड़का उसने लीक करा है,
Yeah,
ठीक
look
है?
at all these nickers.
See, I got the proof. Look here. This is your class link.
Yes,
They're
sir.
like,
Zoom rating, baby.
Are you all from Kerala?
Yo, you're a fucking
Kerala?
snitch, bro. Fuck you, man.
Yes, hello, sister.
केवल नाम का लड़का है वो।
ടീച്ചർ ഒരു മിനിറ്റ് വെയിറ്റ് ചെയ്യാനൊന്ന് റിമൂവ് ചെയ്ത് കൊടുത്തോട്ടെ.
Okay.
പക്ഷെ മാം അവർക്ക് റിമൂവ് ചെയ്താലും വീണ്ടും ജോയിൻ ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റില്ല.
പറ്റില്ല
വേറെ
പറ്റില്ല.
ഓക്കെ.
നിങ്ങൾ ക്ലാസ്സിൽ ആത്മാർത്ഥമായിട്ട് പങ്കെടുക്കാൻ ഉദ്ദേശിക്കുന്നവര് മൈക്ക് മ്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്യുക. മൈക്ക് ഓൺ ആക്കുന്നവരെ ഞാൻ റിമൂവ് ചെയ്യും.
मुझसे शादी करोगी, हाँ, yeah.
Okay, ma'am, continue.
Okay, sister. Thank you. It was such a disturbance. I don't know what happened. Anyway, mixed metaphor. We are talking about metaphors which writers often mix in their pieces of writing.
Excuse me,
Writers combine.
sorry to interrupt. Can you please repeat what's extended? There was so much disturbance. So, can you please repeat what's extended metaphor?
Okay, I shall repeat it maybe towards the end of the class.
Okay.
We shall continue now. Mixed metaphor. We are talking about writers combine two metaphors which normally do not go together. Such a mixing of two metaphors in the same piece of writing is known as mixed metaphor. See, here is an example given in page number 23. Most of those in the gathering were friends and co-workers who had toiled in the constituency vineyards, trying to harvest votes in campaigns of yesteryears. To them, Dalton Camp was a comrade in the trenches, sharing in victory, commiserating in defeat, and ready when called on. See, in the example given, political friends are trying to gather votes, are first described as harvesters who are collecting grapes, and then they are described as soldiers. So a comparison is made between the harvesters and the political friends. At the same time, the political friends acting as soldiers. So here is a comparison where the same thing is compared to, the same idea is compared to two other things. The political friends, they are compared to harvesters. And in the same piece of writing, in the same paragraph, they are compared to soldiers as such. See, there is no commonness seen in these comparisons, but writers sometimes they make use of two metaphors in the same piece of writing. And these two metaphors, they may not go together in the sense that, there is no kind of similarity between harvesters and soldiers, unless we are talking about the toil that both of them have to face during their work hours. So that is a kind of comparison done using mixed metaphor. So that is about mixed metaphor. And now let me talk about extended metaphor. As I was telling you, somebody asked me to re-explain it. Extended metaphor is nothing but, see, the comparison goes on for a longer time in the sense that it is spread throughout the whole article or piece of writing. If it is a poem, it is extended throughout the poem. Throughout the poem, we'll find two objects or two persons being compared. So it is extended throughout the piece of writing, be it a poem or any prose piece. So that is extended metaphor. The whole comparison goes on. It is extended through the whole piece of writing. So I hope we are moving on to the next one, the next figure of speech, which is 6.4, which is there in 6.4 subsection, which is synecdoche.
Ma'am, excuse me.
Yes.
Dead metaphors are different from mixed metaphors.
Pardon? Dead metaphors?
Yes, metaphors are different from mixed metaphors.
Can you tell me what dead metaphors are?
Ma'am, dead metaphors are the metaphors that usually use the combination of metaphors that are cliche or have been used a lot of times. So there was a book I was reading about metaphors. So it was mentioned there about dead metaphors. So usme bhi matlab we are using combination of metaphors. So that's what I asked. Ki mixed metaphors are different from dead metaphors.
Okay, I had not gone through something called dead metaphors, but when you told me, it was clear enough. But I don't think there is any thing similar between dead metaphors and mixed metaphors, because dead metaphors are the name itself suggests that it is a dead one. That means it has been used for a long, long time. It has become a cliche. So mixed metaphors may not go. Mixed metaphors are metaphors which poets use or writers use in order to bring in two comparisons at the same time in a piece of writing. They may not be always old. They may be fresh. The two comparisons are fresh enough, just that they do not have much in common. Almost nothing in common they have, the two metaphors. When they are mixed in a piece of writing, they do not have anything in common. And that becomes mixed metaphor. But what you said about dead metaphor is that it is repeatedly being used by the writers, and it has become so common that it is almost like a dead one. So now, moving on, thank you, Mansi, for sharing your doubt. Synecdoche is a figure of speech in which a part of an object refers to the whole or the whole to a part. See, at times we talk of cars. We say that I'm going on wheels. See, if somebody asks me, how are you going to attend the party? I'm going on wheels. That means I'm going to use my motorcycle or bicycle or my four-wheeler. So has Mike got wheels is an example given here. So the word wheels here refers to the vehicle to which these wheels are attached, be it a motorcycle or a bicycle, anything. So a part stands for the whole. A part refers to the whole. Wheels refers to the vehicle to which it is attached. See, look at that skirt. See, if somebody looks at a woman and says, look at that skirt, there is a group of people standing together and somebody says, look at that skirt. See, it's not that the skirt is being mentioned, but the woman wearing that skirt is being pointed out at. So look at that skirt simply means the woman in that particular skirt. So the skirt stands for the whole woman there. And then, can you spare your wallet? Can you spare your wallet means, can you give me some money? Can you lend me some money? It's not of the object wallet, but the money inside the wallet. Then he is skilled at twisting another person's arms. See, he is skilled at twisting another person's arms. Here, person's arm doesn't have the literal usage, doesn't have the literal meaning. Body part arm stands for the whole person. And what is being done? He is morally pressurized. So, when somebody here, this kind of a usage is being made, he is skilled at twisting another person's arm. That means that he is skilled at pressurizing people morally. See, disturbing people mentally and morally is what he is skilled at. This is the meaning of the fourth example there. So, what happens here in Synecdoche is a part stands for the whole or a whole or the whole to a part. A part refers to the whole or a whole to the part. So moving on to the next one, the next literary device, which is metonymy. Metonymy is nothing but a figure of speech in which the name of an attribute or adjunct is substituted for that of a thing meant. See, when I say I enjoy reading Shakespeare, page number, we are the same block. We are continuing with the same text. 6.5 is the section. Page 26. In the text, it is 116. Thank you. So, metonymy is a figure of speech in which the name of an attribute or adjunct is substituted for that of the thing meant. That means, see, if someone says that I enjoy reading Shakespeare, it doesn't mean the person Shakespeare, but the plays and the works by Shakespeare. And then a minister of the crown. The word crown here stands for the king. So the word crown refers to the king there. Please clean the brass. Doesn't mean cleaning the metal brass, but it means things made of brass. All the things made of brass which are found in the premises, or everything has to be cleaned. My friend plays Beethoven. See, Beethoven stands for the kind of music he is popular for his music. So my friend plays Beethoven well means he is good at playing the music by Beethoven. So this is how we make use of metonymy. Writers make use of metonymy. See, it is again a skillful use of words. See, if someone says, I enjoy reading the plays of Shakespeare, a dry kind of a sentence which is in the ordinary sense, day-to-day conversation. But if someone says a sentence like, I enjoy reading Shakespeare, the whole vista of Shakespeare's writings come into our mind, and we start appreciating the whole set of books or works written by Shakespeare. So that creates a different feel when we see such a sentence, when we read out such a sentence. So it doesn't simply mean that somebody is reading the plays of Shakespeare. It becomes a dry sentence, not that interesting, appealing. But when someone says, I enjoy reading Shakespeare, that appeals, that brings in an aesthetic beauty to the sentence. So moving on to the next one, which is personification, figures of speech. In block 2, I think it is the last one in this particular unit. Personification is nothing but attributing human qualities or human characteristics. Okay, page number 117, somebody is reminding. We are continuing with the same text. So the page numbers won't be that difficult to find out. Personification is giving the human characteristics, powers or feelings to inanimate objects or abstract qualities. See, that is, we are attributing human qualities to inanimate objects or abstract qualities. See, I told you what do you mean by abstract. Abstract ideas or abstract qualities are qualities. Abstract things are things that which we cannot touch, or we cannot throw away, or we cannot point out. We can simply have a feel of it. Honesty, truth. Such words are abstract. Such qualities are abstract. See, in personification, a comparison is implied, but the purpose of personification is to make the description somewhat more vivid. We have this famous poem by John Donne, The Sun Rising. So the poem begins with these lines, the lines given as example in your textbook. See, look at the way sun is addressed as a human being.
Which unit is?
The same unit, 6.6 is the subsection. Personification is the title of that section. Page 26 if you are online.
Block 1.
Block 2.
Okay.
You have been following, I think, and we are continuing from the same. We are moving on page by page. So I think those who have been in the class from the very beginning won't have any difficulty finding out the pages. Okay, so Sun Rising is the poem given here. Some of the initial lines are given here. Busy old fool, unleash sun. Why does thou thus through window and through curtains call on us? See, normally sun doesn't call on us. Normally sun doesn't disturb somebody by knocking at one's windows. But here, sun is taken to be a human being. Sun is attributed the qualities of human being, and sun is addressed as a fool, an old fool. Sun is said to be unruly. Most of the time, these qualities are attributed to human beings. But here, see, for the sake of the aesthetic beauty or aesthetic appeal, the poet has very beautifully used it in order to refer to the sun. Words like fool, old, fool, unruly are applied or are attributed to the sun. And the action of calling in. See, we call on some people. Here, one is calling on the windows of the two lovers and disturbing them. So, personification is attributing human qualities to inanimate objects or abstract ideas. So that is the end of Unit 6. We have discussed all figures of speech in Unit 6, I suppose. We have discussed metaphor, simile, extended metaphor, mixed metaphor. We have discussed synecdoche. We have gone through metonymy, and we have also looked at what is known as personification. So now into the next unit. So this block is over. The second block is over. Into the third block, we are going to slowly drift into. No, the block is not over, sorry. Unit 7 is there. Unit 7 consists of other figures of speech, which are irony, paradox, and antithesis. These three are the things discussed in Unit 7. Unit 7 discusses irony, paradox, and antithesis. What do you mean by irony? See, irony is a special use of words in which what the speaker intends or means doesn't actually come out of his mouth as he intends. That is, whatever he intends, the direct opposite of it is what is stated. If someone says, "You are very good," I stress upon the word very. You're very good. I may not be saying that the person is really good. What I mean is the quite opposite of it. So irony is the figure of speech in which the extended meaning is the opposite of, or at least in sharp contrast to, the literal meaning. What I mean, what I said doesn't equal with what I intend. My intent is to say the opposite. I mean quite the opposite of what I say. I mean quite the opposite of what I say. So in irony, it's a figure of speech in which the intended meaning is the opposite of, or quite in contrast to, the literal meaning. We also have satires. You might have heard of literary satires. What are satires? Satires, aksheba hasyam nanu paraya. Through ridiculing, making fun of the wise and follies of others, we actually try to tell them that their sort of behavior, their sort of actions are not quite praiseworthy. We attack individuals using satire. See, satire is something in which, a kind of writing in which people ridicule the wise and follies of the individuals in the society. So we have satires, political satires are there. Other kind of social satires are there in which the follies and foibles of the society is being portrayed in order to make fun of them, in order to rectify their personality or behavior. Then we have what is called paradox. See, paradox is nothing but making use of contradictory or incompatible elements. See, making use of contrary or incompatible elements in the same sentence. So there is a whole lot of explanation about irony. I'll be telling you more about irony and some of the examples too. See, a self-contradictory statement is what is known as paradox. It's a figure of speech where it is apparently self-contradictory, but it is more or less the truth. See, when somebody who is 20 years old, when he says that I'm celebrating my 5th birthday anniversary, see, to us it doesn't seem to be reasonable. To us it doesn't seem to be, we find it odd. Why do we find it odd? Because, see, normally a person who is 20-year-old should celebrate his 20th birth anniversary. But it makes sense if the person is born on February 29th. See, February 29th comes up only every leap year. If somebody who is 20 years old celebrates his 5th birthday, he says that he is celebrating his 5th birthday, the statement becomes true only when he is born, because it becomes a sensible perception only when he is born February 29th. So contradictory elements are together in put together in paradoxical statements. They are self-contradictory in nature. So most often, unknowingly, we do that, or we make use of paradox when we write our answers. See, similar, what we unknowingly do is, at the same time, we support an argument, and at the same time, by adding a negative word, we negate the same statement. So paradoxical elements come in our answer, and that makes us lose our marks. So that is a paradoxes. See, about irony, I need to tell you more because there is a whole lot of discussion in your text. What is meant by irony? I told you, irony is nothing but a figure of speech which what the person intends is not what he states. See, we have different types of irony. Irony of situation is there. What I mean by irony of situation? See, situations develop to its logical conclusion, yet almost at the end it takes an opposite turn. A situation is known as the irony of situation. The true meaning of a set of circumstances is revealed only towards the end. So till then, we are kept at a mystery. The secret is not revealed unless the whole idea comes to a completion, the whole act or action comes to a conclusion. So that is known as situation, irony of situation. See, we have this famous short story by O. Henry, Gift of the Magi. You might have heard about it. A husband and wife, a couple. See, they love each other so much. For Christmas, they want to gift each other. See, and when the wife brings in a strap for the watch, the husband has already, given away the watch in order to buy a tab for the wife. So the whole idea of it, or the whole situation comes to is revealed only towards the end of the short story. So such situations are known as irony of situations. See, there is an irony in the sense, see, what is intended is revealed only towards the end. The situation, when it is over, only it's the end of it, the intention is revealed. See, we know this famous speech by Mark Antony, Shakespeare's Mark Antony, in Julius Caesar. See, we know that he keeps on friends, Romans, countrymen. See, and see, what he does is he keeps on repeating the word honorable in order to talk about Brutus. Brutus is an honorable man. Brutus is honorable. He keeps on repeating the same sentence again and again. But what he intends or what he means is quite the opposite. Because Brutus was also one among the conspirators who put an end to Caesar's life. So there is verbal irony in this particular example that I gave you. So there are different types of ironies. I also told you about paradox, what is meant by paradox. Moving on, we have what is known as, we have come to the end of that particular unit. We have two or three other figures of speech, which are nothing but simile, sorry, not simile, symbol. Let me check. A symbol, allegory, and imagery. Unit 8, figures of speech, part 3 is there. Unit 8, which talks about things like allegory, symbol, and imagery. What is meant by allegory, what is meant by imagery, and what is meant by symbol. See, literary examples from literature are given here. The whole chapter gives you examples from literary pieces about allegory, about imagery, and symbols. So we cannot go through the whole thing. We can simply just discuss what allegory, symbol, and imagery means. See, allegory is a form of writing which makes ordinary sentences deeper and richer. See, allegory is a form of writing. Most often it is, we have allegoric, political allegory, allegoric novels are there, allegoric poems are there. See, it's page number, if you want a page number 45, allegory. Unit 8. An allegory is a form of writing in which persons, places, objects, and events have meanings and implications beyond the literal meaning. See, we have this famous novel by George Orwell, Animal Farm. See, all the animals in the novel represent a political leader or political figure who was there during the time of the writing of this novel. See, all the political institutions that were there going around in the society have representations in the form of animals in the novel Animal Farm. See, the characters in the story often represent ideas or qualities such as patience, purity, truth, anger, jealousy, lust, greediness, etc. See, what happens is in allegory, see, most of the time the persons or the places or the objects that are used in the novel, that are described in the novel, they have implications beyond the implication in the novel. നോവലിൽ അതിന്റെ മീനിങ്ങിൽ ഉപരിയായിട്ട് പരമസമൂഹവുമായിട്ട് അതിന് ലിറ്ററൽ ആയിട്ടുള്ള മീനിങ്ങിന് പുറമെ ഇംപ്ലിക്കേഷൻസ് ഉണ്ടാവും. അങ്ങനെയുള്ളതിനെയാണ് ആലിഗറി എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. You text, there is an example from John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress. See, Animal Farm is a very good example for what is known as political allegory. See, in this Pilgrim's Progress, there is an account of the journey of a boy named Christian who moves from the city of destruction to the city of Zion. See, it is all about how, see, people, ordinary people, see, we undergo spiritual adventures, we undergo several temptations, we overcome them, we face several dangers before attaining what is known as salvation. See, it's a story of any true Christian who is on the path of salvation. So we have characters like, sloth, presumption, hypocrisy, all these ideas come into play in the Pilgrim's Progress, and how the character Christian, the boy Christian, is able to overcome all these evils and attain salvation. So that is about allegory. Moving on to symbol. See, just a minute. I want a 2 or 3 minutes break. I'll be coming back. Please don't go away.
Sure.
It's okay, students, I'm back. We are going on into what is known as symbol. See, we might have seen symbols everywhere. The cross represents a particular religion. We have the skull, which represents danger. We have colors which represent certain ideas. See, think of the flag of India, the tricolor flag of India, which all the colors represent different ideas. So a symbol can be a sign, a mark, a word, or an object looked upon as representing something. It represents something. It can be a mark, it can be a word, it can be an object, it can be a sign, a signboard which represents something. In maths too, we have symbols. The cross represents multiplication. See, the into sign represents multiplication. The cross represents addition. See, we know all that. See, there are color symbolisms as well. a particular color stands for. See, if we know that a running train can be stopped using a red color cloth because red stands for danger. See, in the traffic signals also, the red stands for stop. See that dove, a white dove stands for, see, peace, for love. So all these things we are familiar with. A white rose stands for a symbol of love, red for a symbol of passion. See, all these things we already might have heard of somewhere or the other. See, in your text, there is an example from Robert Frost, the poem of Robert Frost. The poem, The Road Not Taken, is given. See, wherein the whole poem talks about two roads which are diverse in yellow wood. The two roads here stands for a situation in all our lives wherein we have to take up decisions. We have two options and we have to take a decision. So two roads there stands for difficult choices in our life. It can symbolize, it can be symbolically representing two very difficult choices in our life. And we have to choose one out of the two. So it can be in the field of profession, it can be about relationships, anything of that sort. So the road, the two roads here symbolizes or represents difficult choices in life. So symbols are nothing but signs, marks, etc., which represent a particular idea. Then we have what is called imagery. See, imagery, as I told you, is we have been talking of it when we spoke about metaphors. Word pictures, imagery is nothing but word picture. Images are nothing but word pictures. Imagery may be defined as a representation of sense experience through language. The word image often suggests a mental picture. A visual imagery is the most frequent kind of imagery in literary writings. So, most often, see, if I need to make it simple for you, I'll tell you about Robert Browning, who was a Victorian poet who was famous for the kind of poems which are known as dramatic monologues. See, dramatic in the sense, they are dramatic in the sense that whatever is described in the poem comes alive in front of us. We feel that everything is happening right in front of our eyes. We can form a word picture out of the poem that we read. The poem by Robert Browning gives us such a feel. See, there are many poems, but the easiest to remember is the poems by Robert Browning, especially the dramatic monologues. See, they are dramatic in nature in the sense that everything comes alive in front of us. See, here imagery is nothing but it suggests mental picture. The writer creates images by using vivid sensory details in order to make it appealing to the reader. See, here is an example, a simple example in your textbook where a statement is made. Try to do great things. Try to do great things. So this is an ordinary kind of a sentence that we use in our day-to-day life. But when someone says, hitch your wagon to a star, hitch your wagon to a star. So we imagine a star, We imagine that we are in a wagon, and we are moving towards the star. So the two sentences carry the same meaning. The idea remains the same, but they are said in two different ways. The first one is a straightforward kind of a statement, and other appeals to our imagination, brings the picture of a star. If you want a page number, it's page 52. 8.4 imagery, 8.4. T.S. Eliot's The Hollow Men is given. Yes, if it's your textbook 147, thank you. Helping your friends. So you have this sentence, try to do great things. So if someone says try to do great things, it has an ordinary sense of a meaning. It doesn't trigger our imagination. But when someone expresses the same idea, stating that hitch your wagon to a star, see, it caters to our imagination. It builds a kind of a mental picture. We think of a star. We imagine that we are in a wagon, and then we are heading towards the star. So that makes it more appealing. The second example makes the reader use his imagination to perceive a special image, the image of the star and the wagon. So another example from T.S. Eliot's Hollow Men is given. We are also given examples from literature. Keats's Ode to Autumn is given as an example. Then moving on to what is we have come to the end of that particular unit. Unit 8 has come to an end. So we have discussed three things in this particular unit, which is imagery, symbol, and what was the third one? Allegory. So these are the three things that we discussed in this particular unit, unit 8. So now into the next one, next block, the third and the fourth block we have. See, in the third block, there is a discussion on structure words. What are structure words and what are content words? These are grammatical elements. See, what we have to be careful about is how to recognize a structure word, how to recognize a content word, and why do writers make use of structure words and content words in a way that it appeals the readers. See, structure words are grammatical words or grammatical units. Content words are actually words of which you can find meanings in a dictionary. See? Structure words are words which are grammatical units. See, an article, the articles a and the demonstratives, these, those, that, this, all these come under structure words. Prepositions, conjunctions, all these come under the category known as the structure words. Words can be divided into two, the structure words and the content words. Structure words are nothing but grammatical words or grammatical units. And content words are words of which we find entry in a dictionary. You might be knowing that a dictionary is also known as a lexicon. Dictionary ne nammal lexicon nu vilikkarundu. So, thinking in that way, content words are also lexical words. They are also known as lexical words. You might be asked to differentiate between structure words and content words. So content words are nothing but words which have definite meaning given in a dictionary. Structure words are grammatical units which help create meaning by joining the content words. So this is the whole idea which is discussed in the first unit out here. See the whole unit. Not only the whole unit, the whole block actually talks about this idea of the content words and the structure words. They are discussing it in detail. That is why it has taken up a whole block. What are structure words and what are content words? I've already given you an idea. And to be very particular, I'll tell you that structure words are limited in number. That is why we call them as closed class items. We call it a closed class because the number of entry into that particular group is limited. Structure words are few in number compared to the content words. And then what are content words? Content words are words of which you will find entry in a dictionary, or you will find they have some meaning aspect in them. They carry a whole lot of in them. And now look at the 8 parts of speech. I'm not going through line by line or unit by unit from now onwards because the whole idea is spread into various units in your textbook. So I'll just give you what these things mean. An idea about what structure words are, an idea about what content words are, which are the content words in English, or the open class items in English, and which are the closed class items in English. So you might be knowing your parts of speech: noun, pronoun, adjective, verb, adverb, preposition, interjection, and conjunction. Sorry, conjunction, and then the last one is interjection if you go by the order. And what are they? See, these are normally known as the parts of speech. And out of these, the nouns, the pronouns, the adverbs, the nouns, the adverbs, the main verbs, etc. are known as the content words. Nouns, adjectives, adverbs, and main verbs are known as the content words. They are also known as the open class items because day by day new entries can be made into this list of nouns, adjectives, adverbs, and main verbs. But the other class, which is known as the closed class, consists of conjunctions, prepositions, interjections, auxiliary verbs, etc. See, here is a whole unit dedicated to auxiliary verbs. We do not have to go unit by unit because see, everything is very in detail. They have been explaining things. I'll just give you the idea about it. And when you go through it, when you go through this chapter by chapter, things will be more and more clearer to you. So one thing, remember, content words are also known as open class items or open classes. Structure words are also known as closed class items because the number of the structure words is limited. And they do not make new entries possible into their list. And what are content words meant for? Content words normally have the meaning contained in them, while structure words are the grammatical elements which help join these content words and create meaning out of it. So these are two categories of words seen in English. And why are we discussing these two when we are discussing a paper like language through literature? See, we are discussing this because poets make use of these content words and structure words not in the ordinary way that we do. They sometimes make it or use it in a different way in order to create what is known as aesthetic pleasure in the readers. So these are some of the things that I wanted to tell you about content words and structure words. Closed class and open class. Closed class is the class of structure words, which contains articles, pronouns, prepositions, conjunctions, etc. Open class, the name suggests all, it is open to new entries. A class of words that admits new members, and which of the parts of speech are known as the open class items, which they are noun, adjectives, verbs, and as I told you, adverbs. These four are known as the open class items or the content words. So the whole discussion of these things is made in the rest of the unit. See, different types of auxiliaries are being discussed. Auxiliaries and main verbs, primary auxiliaries, modal auxiliaries. Which are modal auxiliaries? We know the modals in English: can, could, might, may. All these are known as auxiliary verbs. Primary auxiliaries are also there, the different forms of the word be, have and do, did, does, is, am, are, have, has, had. All these are primary auxiliaries, and the others are modals: will, shall, can, could, may, might. All these come under the section auxiliaries. And they are also structure words. Remember, they are also structure words. They are limited in number. Remember that aspect as well. So I think we have come to the end of our discussion. Just let me check. Block 4. Block 4 is about rhetorical devices. What are rhetorical devices? We have to discuss that. See, rhetorical devices, what are rhetorical devices, or what is meant by rhetoric? See, rhetoric is a word derived from the Greek word rhetor, which means an orator or a public speaker. So rhetorical devices, from this very definition, it is clear that rhetorical devices are nothing but the devices that we make use of while giving speeches in order to impress people, in order to persuade them, in order to sway people. Some of the devices that we use in order to persuade people, in order to sway people, persuade people, such devices are known as the rhetorical devices. So block 4 talks about rhetorical devices. See the example that I gave you from Shakespeare. See, there are expressions which create emotional appeal to the listeners. See, Mark Antony's speech, as I told you, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. See, he begins his speech using this expression. So, by creating an emotional appeal to the listener, he has used these words in a special manner. And that is one way of restating things or using rhetorics. So this is a kind of tactic wherein directly we are addressing the listener. Direct opening is there. Friends, Romans, countrymen, when we start our speech or a public lecture, it's block 4, page 10 online. I'm looking at the online textbook, page 10. So this is one way of beginning a speech. It's part of rhetoric. How to impress people, how to persuade people, how to sway people. So direct addressing is one way, one tactic of beginning a speech. See, there are people who might use anecdotes and begin their narration or begin their speech. So that is another way of using rhetorics. There are also beginnings like using the topic. See, introducing the topic in brief at the beginning of the speech. The issue under discussion can be revealed briefly and clearly at the very beginning of the discussion of the speech. So that is also another tactic of using the rhetorics. See, sometimes we can make use of WH questions. Repeated WH questions can be asked at the very beginning of our speech. And then one by one we can give answers, bring in answers to those questions and then continue with our speech. So that is another tactic that rhetoricians or public speakers use. So these are some of the tactics which come under rhetorics, repetition or direct address, or as I told you just now, direct address to the speaker, beginning with WH questions. All these are different tactics used by rhetoricians or public speakers, rhetorical devices we can call them. See, why do rhetoricians or why do people who make public speeches, why do they use such devices in order to, they make use of such devices in order to elevate their style, in order to persuade people, in order to bring people to their side or gain their attention. See, they appeal to the emotions of the listeners. While we make use of rhetorical devices, we actually have an organized kind of a speech in front of us. Otherwise, what we are speaking about does not have a cohesion or does not have a completion. It does not have a correspondence, one-to-one correspondence. The ideas do not match with each other. One idea is is about something else, and the other idea comes to be totally different. So, making use of rhetorical devices that I told you, different tactics using which we can begin our speech, we can continue our public speeches. All these rhetorical devices, they help us in effective organization. So these are the three things or three features which can be noted if one uses rhetorical devices. See, it appeals to the emotions of the listeners. It elevates the style of the speaker. It also helps him organize things effectively. Ideas can be organized effectively if one makes use of rhetorical devices, as we have just stated. An anecdote or a direct address to the listener. All these different tactics, strategies in public speaking helps you organize things, help you gain more listeners, gain you more attention from the listeners. So these come out to be of great help. So this is in block 4 that we have discussed rhetorical devices. The whole block 4 discusses rhetorical devices of different nature. What is meant by rhetorics? Rhetorical devices are discussed. See, questions may come from all the units. See, most of the time you will get a particular set of lines from a poem and you will be asked to find out the literary devices. So if you find a sentence in which the consonant sounds are repeated, must tell them that there is a use of alliteration made in this particular line or stanza. If you find a metaphor running throughout the whole stanza, you can say that the poet has made use of what is called the extended metaphor. So this is how you identify things. I told you all about the literary devices, how you need to identify them, and what are their peculiarities. I told you about them. I think the class might be useful to you. Please go through the previous year question papers before you start preparing for your exams. See, the pattern almost always remains the same, just that the works, the articles vary. Yes?
മാം അതിന് പ്രീവിയസ് കോഡ് ഒന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു തരാൻ പറ്റുമോ ഈ ടെക്സ്റ്റിന്റെ ഇപ്പോഴുള്ള BGLA 137 പ്രീവിയസ് കോഡ് ഈ ലാംഗ്വേജ് ത്രൂ ലിറ്ററേച്ചർ എന്നതിന്റെ
Sister, are you there? Can you help? I think it is. Let me check. I think it is BEG 106. Sister?
BEG 106 ആണോ?
106 ആണെന്നാണ് എൻ്റെ ഒരു വിശ്വാസം. ഞാൻ
ഏതാ
BEGLA 137 എന്നുള്ളത് BE 106 ആണോ സിസ്റ്റർ?
അതെ അതെ അതെ
ആണല്ലേ? I was not sure about it. That is why I was asking your help. 106 ആണ്. 106 ആണ്. 106.
BEG 106 അല്ലേ?
BEGE ഉണ്ട്. BEGE 106.
Thank you ma'am. Thank you ma'am.
So previous question papers നോക്കുക. Previous question papers maximum solve ചെയ്യാൻ ശ്രമിക്കുക. അങ്ങനെയൊക്കെയാണ് നിങ്ങൾ എക്സാമിന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് പ്രിപ്പയർ ചെയ്യേണ്ടത്. പാറ്റേൺ റിമെയിൻസ് ദ സെയിം, but just that the poems or the authors might change. So all the best for your exams. Yes.
മാം ഞങ്ങളുടെ ഈ അസൈൻമെന്റ് പേപ്പറിലെ